right, we're joined now by ESPN's Mike Reiss and Christian Fauria from Foxborough. Gentlemen, let's get right to it when it comes to this situation. A hire here, quickly done. Just each of your thoughts individually. What do you think?
Go ahead.
I'll lead off. To me, head coaching job in the NFL is a hard job, Dan. There's 32 of them, and there probably aren't 32 qualified people to do them. Mike Vrabel is one of them, and so my long sort of answer short is good hire.
I thought it was the most predictable, obvious hire in the NFL in the last 10 years. As quickly as they moved, as quickly as they had these other interviews to make sure they kind of upheld the Rooney Rule, and as quickly as they hired him, I will say the one thing about Mike, and everyone's going to talk about how great Mike is and just how smart he is, and I think we should temper that a little bit. He knows he's smart. Don't worry about it. You don't need to tell him he's smart. But the most important thing that he can do, okay, is, and this is what leaders need to do, is persuade the people in the organization, inside and out, and the players about their vision. That they need to buy into his vision, and they need to trust and believe that what he's trying to persuade them of, he's capable of.
When Christian says that, Dan, what I hear is establish a clear culture. And I think
clear is key.
Right? And I think part of this is Ben Johnson was a candidate. People like the idea of the offense, the wizard, the play caller. That's a scheme thing. This is bigger picture as a culture setter, and Mike has done that in Tennessee.
They're not that close to it. Ben Johnson can put him over the top, get him to a Super Bowl and get a win, right, because of his offensive wizardry. This is more like they got to reestablish a culture.
You know what? When I was in Seattle, Dennis Erickson was a first-year head coach in the NFL after being in Miami and all these other places. Successful college coach, won a national championship. The difference between Dennis Erickson and the 4 years I had Dennis Erickson and the difference from when Mike Holmgren walked into the building, and not that we were on edge or there was a lot of tension, we just knew this guy knew what he was talking about. We knew that when the game was in a critical situation, the circumstances were their worst, this guy knew what to do. Yeah. And it was a clear message that was easy for everybody to understand. That was such a difference. I remember it like it was yesterday.
And just to be clear, Dan, I think Ben could be a great head coach. It's more of an unknown, to Christian's point, than Mike Vrabel, who's shown a mastery in game management.
All right, so let's kind of go back to the Mayo and the Belichick, the two around Mike Vrabel, before Vrabel. So Taylor Lewin of Tennessee, former Tennessee great tackle, put out an interesting soundbite on social media where he's talking about, guys, get ready. He's going to come in. He's going to tell you how many years he played in the NFL. He's going to get your attention. He's going to tell you the keys, but he's going to be tough. It's going to be hard initially, but then you'll get to love him and he'll win games. What differences do you think we'll see between maybe Belichick and Vrabel as they start this?
So the key is like physically challenging your players now is a lot harder to do in today's game. I think the difference is going to be mentally challenging you. You know, your football IQ, your understanding and dealing with high pressure situations, those types of situations, which is what the NFL and winning and losing is all about, in my opinion. Like there is this whole like snarkiness, this condescending nature that Vrabel puts out there. He did it as a player, and he still does it as a coach, but it is endearing. That's the crazy thing, because usually those two things should not mean endearing, right? But he endears himself to his players.
And it's also authentic.
Yes.
That is who Mike Vrabel is. Yeah. I covered him. You covered him. So it's not fake, and Dan, he'll connect with the players as much as he demands from them.
Speaking of players, Elliott Wolf, Ryan Cowers supposedly coming in as a personnel guy. How long will it take to get Mike Vrabel, the players that you talk about, Christian, that will buy into everything he wants?
The guys are already here. It's going to take 2 seconds. It happens when he walks in. They already know about him. They've already read that. They know all about him. To your point with the Barstool Sports, they already know what they're getting. So there's no messing around. There's no fooling around. There's no trying to circumvent the rules. There's no coming in late. Like, discipline is going to be reinstalled. So as far as the players go, I think, again, back to the clear message. My goal is, like, if Elliott Wolf is in a gray area, remove him. Remove him. If there's indecision of who's in charge and who's making decisions, remove him. Right? Like, you don't need to be second guessing and just wondering who's making the decision.
What I want to hear tomorrow, 12 o'clock, from Mike Vrabel, if Robert Kraft talks to reporters, what is the structure of the organization. What is the alignment? Last year, we knew that Elliott Wolf was going to be picking the players, Gerard Mayo would be part of that, and Gerard Mayo would coach the team. Mike Vrabel, we know is coaching the team this year. How much influence does he have over personnel? And Ryan Cowden, who you mentioned, is he over Elliott Wolf? Is he under? What is the chain of command? It has to be clear, to your point, Christian.
Do we see a return of Josh McDaniels?
Possibly. I mean, I think offensive coordinator, again, I want to hear from Mike Vrabel. What's he thinking? I don't think that would be the only candidate, Dan, but I think he would be
he's
part
had
of...
some good ones, and Arthur Smith and everyone else, too.
He'd be part of the discussion.
Right up the street. He's been very careful about not jumping into a job. This is Josh McDaniels I'm talking about. I think he would be very interested, I didn't talk to anybody, into coming back and being the offensive coordinator for the Patriots.
All right, so let's end it with, Drake May. Everything's circled around Drake May now in this franchise. He had Ryan Tannehill. When Ryan Tannehill was good, they were good. They went to the AFC Championship game. They had Derrick Henry, too. But,
yeah, that's it.
So how does he handle Drake May going forward as the head coach of the Patriots?
I don't think Drake May is, he's already tough. Half of the things that Mike would have to kind of instill in Drake May, he already has it. He's tough, he's physical, he's smart, he's athletic. He's got to teach him how to be a quarterback. Like, that's the next level. He needs to learn how to play quarterback in the NFL, the importance of it, the schemes of it, the intangible things, like, all those things. And he'll slowly become a leader over time. But other than that, they need a lot to help in a lot of positions. I talked to a guy today. I said, and I was asking him what they need help on, and what type of positions, who do they need? He said everything.
Yeah, and I'm going to make a connection here, and I don't know if it's a little risky to do this, but I go to the Chargers last year with Justin Herbert and Brandon Staley. Brandon Staley was his coach for multiple years. Jim Harbaugh comes in. What did he have to do to Justin Herbert? Need to connect with him, right? But then surround him with coaches that are going to work with him, right? And I think same thing for Mike Vrabel with Drake May.
And good players, right? That was a little risky that you said that.
Talent.
Well, I don't know, because I don't know that. I don't know that.
I thought it was a little risky.
When he lives on the edge, you see me moving my chair away.
Living.
Like, whoa.
Christian, thanks for dressing up. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Dan.
Appreciate it.
A little risky.